the sentencing of Southport killer Axel Rudakubana. As we do so, I'm in the company of Joshua Rozenberg KC, the legal commentator, and I'm going to ask him all the questions that have really arisen from your calls, lovely listener. But first, I'd like to ask him something particular. So we know that he has been shouting in court, Joshua. We know he's been causing a commotion, and we know that he was perfectly eloquent when he said to the judge, "You're not looking after me and supporting me. I haven't eaten for 10 days. I haven't slept. I haven't drunk anything. I need a paramedic. I need some kind of support." Anyway, he carried on shouting and screaming and in the end had to be escorted out of court. One of the victim's family members shouted at him, "Coward." So I would like to know whether it is obligatory, compulsory, that the person in the dock does stand there and is present to hear the judge's sentence, or whether you can walk out, cause a rumpus and get kicked out if you want to.
It's really the latter. You are meant to be there. You are brought to court. But there are cases where prisoners refuse to come out of the cells. And the question is, should the security staff force them to come into the dock? And in practice, the answer is no, because you don't want somebody shouting and screaming in the dock and drawing attention to it and causing distress, as we've seen, to the relatives of the victims of that offender. So there have been a few cases recently where people have refused to come up for sentencing, and successive governments, the present government, the previous government, decided they would go for legislation to try and force a defendant into the dock. But how do you do that? Well, if somebody is screaming and shouting, what do you do?
You pull them and push them in the way that police officers, when they arrest people, pull and push them into a police car, police van.
Yeah, but that's to take you away. It's not to make you sit still. If you, as suggested, they should be gagged, put into a straitjacket.
Or handcuff them to the dock, I suppose.
Yeah, but how do you stop them shouting and screaming?
You don't stop them shouting and screaming.
Well, in that case, you can't carry on a serious legal process. So in practical terms, if somebody wants to cause disruption, the only thing the judge can do is to remove them from court, or if they don't come into court, then proceed in their absence. And you've seen cases recently, quite high-profile cases, where the judge has said, "I'm going to address the defendant as if the defendant was sitting in front of me," and reads out the sentencing remarks, "You did this, you did that, and I'm sentencing you to this," and there's nobody there in the dock.
Yeah, I think lots of people listening will think that he should have been made to sit there, even if he were to be shouting and screaming and everything else.
I'm not
because
sure.
At least, but it does seem that this individual who, to all intents and purposes, lacks all empathy, who is not remorseful, who has said, "I am glad these children are dead." I mean, he's actually said that. Suddenly has great empathy for himself, doesn't he? Wants to get himself away, doesn't want to hear the appalling details of the crime that he himself committed and has admitted committing. He wants to get himself away, wants to shelter himself from the censure and from the information and from the horrible feelings of having to be there, doesn't he?
It's his last chance for 30 years, 40 years, who knows? This is just about the last time we'll see him. Obviously, there may be some sort of appeal against sentence at some point in the future. He would be there on a video link from prison. But this is his last chance, and this is what he's choosing to do.
OK, I'm going to ask you again about what lies in the power of the law in terms of restricting, restraining, detaining, imprisoning, or anything else, an individual who it is known to the authorities is hell-bent on committing some kind of murder or massacre or knife attack. It's not known. This individual is known, but of course has not yet done this. Is there anything preemptive that can be done within our law currently?
It depends what's known, and it depends what the defendant has done. If the defendant, as we discussed earlier, is conspiring with somebody else to commit a crime in the future, and there's evidence of that, then you can stop them and arrest them and charge them. If they're attempting to commit a crime, you can arrest them and charge them with that. If they are simply sitting in a room and writing a note out saying, "I want to do this, I plan to do that, I intend to do the other," that's more difficult. You haven't done anything. You've written something down. It may be a fantasy. It may be a novel. You say, "Well, I didn't mean it. I was just, it was an exercise. These thoughts came into my head." Are these people to be found? And how do you find out what they're doing? They're sitting in their room. All right, if they're writing something online, as they probably would be these days, well, there may be some evidence. But it is difficult difficult to stop people committing crimes if there's no evidence that they're about to do it.
And let me ask you something else. I've had several callers ring and say, this is appalling because this person was obviously not given the help that he needed as a young child in the school system, by his parents, by social services. You know, he should have been somehow, I suppose, nurtured and supported out of having these feelings. He shouldn't have wanted to kill people. He shouldn't have wanted to hurt people. He shouldn't have wanted to cause, mass, destruction. He shouldn't have wanted to. And had all of the people who are professionally involved in this sort of thing given him the right kind of treatment at the right time, he wouldn't have wanted to. Now, you're a KC. Do you think some people are simply evil and cannot be gentled or nurtured out of it by any professional?
I'm only an honorary KC, by the way. I don't practice as a barrister. But the answer to your question is yes, of course he should have been given help. Ideally, he would have been given help at school. He would have been given help by the prevent course. He would have been given help by his parents. He would have he would have been put on the right path in a perfect world to the extent that that was possible. And if it wasn't possible, then steps would have been taken to ensure that he didn't get hold of knives or whatever it might be. So yes, of course, that's what should have happened. But we live in an imperfect world, and when you're talking about social services and the authorities and the security services and so on, resources are limited and there's not much that can be done for everybody who might be like this.
Does that mean you don't think there are some people who are just so empirically evil? They are just evil. They are bad people. They are, governed by evil and horrible intent. And it really doesn't matter if you have a lovely therapist and a charming social worker and delightful parents and a very caring school. It really doesn't matter. They can't just remove that from your personality.
I can't read people's minds. I'm a legal commentator rather than somebody who understands psychology.
But given all the cases that you have seen and all the murders that you've had to comment on over all these years, are all of these people, misunderstood? And if only somebody, the nursery school teacher, had stepped in at the right moment, this wouldn't have happened or not?
People are criminals. There are criminals. They think there is something to be gained from committing crimes. And many of them get away with it, and many of them make money out of it, and many of them satisfy sadistic urges, whatever it may be, or just, want to get the benefit of committing crimes because they don't like society. There are all sorts of reasons why people commit crimes. Often they grow out of it. It's often young people who commit crimes, and as they mature, they get older, they understand their place in the world. If they've avoided severe punishment, then possibly they can be redeemed. All sorts of questions about whether you send people to prison, whether it makes it better because it gives them a shock and they think, I'll never do this again, or whether they learn from other criminals and it makes them worse. We try to avoid that. But yes, there are things that can be done to divert people from crime. There's no doubt about it. Right. They cost money.
All right, let's talk about what is open to the judge in this case. What kind of sentence the judge can pass?
Because Rudakubana was under 18, just under 18 at the time of these crimes, he will be sentenced to detention during His Majesty's pleasure, which is a euphemism, a way of making it sound better than, you will be sentenced to indefinite detention, which is what it means. But he will be sent to prison indefinitely. So it is, as the judge said on Monday, a life sentence equivalent. Now, the judge has to set a minimum term. I think we're all agreed that because he was under 18, the judge can't pass what's called a whole life order, which means you're never released. I'm not sure whether a judge would want to send somebody who's only just turned 18 to prison for what could be 80 years or more. But that's not within the judge's power. But what he is told is that he must set a minimum term. He's told that the starting point, if Rudakubana had been 18 at the time, would be 30 years. He's told that because he was 17 at the time, the starting point is 27 years. You add to that, if there are aggravating circumstances, for example, planning or premeditation, the fact that his victims were children and therefore particularly vulnerable, there may be mitigating circumstances such as any mental disorder or mental disability. And then you come up with a total, and that is a total that will be announced by the judge this afternoon, and the judge will say that this is only a minimum term, and Rudakubana shouldn't assume that he will be released after he served that period, however long it is. It will be up to the parole board as things stand, unless things change in the next 20, 30, 40 years, to decide whether he's safe to be released. He won't be released unless his continued detention is no longer considered necessary for the protection of the public.
And with a crime of that magnitude and a sentence of that length and severity, what happens to the prisoner once they're in prison? Are there zealous attempts made to secure the reformation of his character and soul, or is he just considered to be desperately evil and just thrown into a cell with bread and water? I mean, what happens to him for the next 27 years or more?
He will, in due course, be moved into a regime for long-term prisoners. In some ways, they get a better level of treatment than short-term prisoners because there is time to work on them. That's the one thing they have. So prisoners study. Prisoners do degrees. I visited a prison where there were men in their 30s who'd been convicted of murder, often stabbings, things like that, and they were studying law. They were visiting law teachers, coming in and helping them to understand the law. So they were using their time reasonably productively. They were getting the education that I think they'd all generally missed out at when they were teenagers and when they fell into bad company and so on. The idea is to help the prisoner through this extraordinary period of time, his most productive years, the time when he should be meeting people, having a family, learning a trade, doing whatever else all of us do. That time is gone to him, and so the authorities, for his sake and for good order in prison, will try to redeem him in the sense of giving him something worthwhile to do.
And finally, callers are, of course, ringing the station, ringing LBC and saying this would be the optimum case for capital punishment, because what is the point locking an unrepentant, unremorseful, sadist, murderer up for years and years? It's expensive, it's pointless, he's never going to reform, and it's going to cost us all a fortune and block up a precious prison place, which we need for other criminals. It would be the right thing to do in this case. What do you say to them?
How do they know he's not going to be reformed after time? How do we know that he is not going to come to terms with what he did, realise the enormity of his crimes? He can't really make amends. He certainly can't make amends to these bereaved parents or the people he attempted to kill. There's not very much he can do in terms of good work in the community. But we can't be sure he won't be reformed. And if we're going to start to restore the death penalty, which would be a huge change in society, going to the sort of societies where people are sentenced to death, which is not our society, we need a great deal more thought and care before we do that.